Good morning, everyone. So we'll get right into who we are.
I'm Mach, and I'm with the University of Kentucky. I'm a new master's student in the entomology program.
And I'm Saeed, and I started at UK a few years ago, and I just finished my master's this spring, and now I'm working in Dr. Potter's lab with Bernie on a new project that we're going to talk about. So we'll get right into it. I bet everybody that's heard anything about bees has been hearing a lot about the fact that they're in decline. If you turn on the news and it's anything about bees, it's talking about the fact that there aren't as many bees year after year.
We have to turn on your microphone. It's on? Yeah. Sorry.
Okay. So yeah, bees are definitely in decline, and we're hearing a lot about it. And so why should we care about bees? Why are they important? I'm sure everybody knows bits and pieces of this, and I started to learn more about this when I started to do this project. But they pollinate 80% of our flowering crops, including plants and native crops. Native plants and crops, sorry. And so their services in the United States are valued at over $20 billion, and 1/3 of everything that we eat is either directly or indirectly brought to us by pollinators. That includes birds, but most of that is insects like bees. So with bees, sorry, I don't know how to fix that. That right there, with bees, is what your blueberries would look like, and without bees you wouldn't get the fruit. The fruit would not set without bee pollination. And so bee conservation is also important because it supports wildlife. So it spreads the seed of native plants which sustain insects, which then birds and small mammals feed on, and so it's a great ecosystem, and bees are greatly responsible for maintaining those systems. And also aesthetic beauty. We like our hollies. We like them to have those beautiful red berries, but those berries would not be possible if those hollies did not get pollinated. So an interesting fact is that honeybees are not native. They were brought to North America in the early 1600s by European settlers. So they're an introduced bee. But we do have native bees of our own. In fact, in the US, we have over 4,000 species of bees that are not honeybees. So it's a very incredible number, and I was surprised to find that out myself. And some of the types, and these you probably recognize, are our bumblebees, our adorable little clumsy bees, carpenter bees that some people don't like at all, some people like them. Mason bees and leafcutter bees, these are great pollinators of native wildflowers, but they're also great pollinators of crops. Sweat bees, you guys probably see these all over the place. They're tiny little bees, and they like your sweat, so you might find them all over yourself. Then we have the mining bees that are really great apple pollinators. So apple orchards that do not bring in honeybees are entirely pollinated, mostly by andrenids. And so why are bee populations declining? Now this is where the controversial topic starts, but also it's very important to know there are more than just one reason for why bees are declining. And so for honeybees, specific to honeybees, colony collapse disorder, a word that you've probably heard over and over. I wasn't sure what it meant until I studied it, but people keep throwing the word around. So what does that actually mean? In 2006, beekeepers actually started to notice year after year that they had fewer and fewer bees and fewer beehives. And so colony collapse disorder is basically the phenomenon of you going to your hive and the bee colony is not there anymore. So what happens is that the bees will abandon their hive, and there won't be enough resources left in the hive to sustain it, and therefore the hive will collapse. So that's just a general overarching term, but as far as what causes it is what we were partly looking at. What is resulting in these collapse of these colonies? Part of the problem is bee diseases are on the rise. Things like bacterial diseases like American foul brood. If you're a beekeeper, is anybody here a beekeeper? Nope, but if you keep bees, you've heard of these big diseases like American foul brood. We have exotic viruses, and we also have a lot of fungus problems, but one of the major ones are parasitic mites, which includes the varroa mite right here, and then the tracheal mite right here. And a little bit of a scale example. If you were a bee this is how big a varroa mite would be on you, and it's a parasite, so it'll be sucking your blood. And this is Dr. Dan Potter right here. So just showing you what it's like to have a varroa mite. And another part of the problem is careless insecticide use. How many of you heard about the bee die-off, the bees that died in Oregon? That made the news. It was last year, and it incidentally happened during Pollinator week, and so it was unfortunate, and so we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. But careless use of insecticides, spraying them against what the label recommends and spraying it in locations that you're not supposed to are another part of the problem as far as bee decline. And one of the major drivers is also habitat loss. So we are expanding, humans are taking over a lot of the naturalized areas, we're building suburbs and cities and skyscrapers, and so this urban sprawl is resulting in fewer and fewer nice habitats for bees to be able to nest in. And so all these factors together kind of play a role and make a perfect storm as far as bee decline, and they all interact together. And so our lab focuses on two of these factors, and we'll start with one. We'll start with the pesticide topic, where we're going to tell you a little bit about the research in our lab with regards to what these effects of these pesticides are specific to lawn management. So this is an important issue for the green industry because you need to take care of lawns. People don't want their lawns to look like beds of weeds, and so you need to take care of them, but you also have to think about the fact that people are now caring a lot more about bees as they're hearing about the fact that they're declining. So we wanted to find a balance between being able to do that and also not contributing to the problem of pollinator decline. So neonicotinoids definitely have a bad reputation as far as bees, but a lot of the studies, a lot of these this research that's been done on neonicotinoids has been, oh sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. So part of the problem with neonicotinoids are that they're systemic, which means that when you apply neonicotinoids to a plant, they are in the entire tissue of the plant. And when this was being researched and established, they didn't realize that this may also be present in the nectar and the pollen of these plants. This may also be present in the tissue that the insects will use for their nesting materials, so it could have adverse effects on non-target insects. And so a lot of studies have gone on and on about looking at the effect of neonicotinoids on insects, especially bees, but a lot of these have not done this in the field. A lot of these have done this in the lab with concentrations that are unrealistic. So what we did was we took this to the field and we applied everything at label rate. So we wanted to see the hazards of these lawn insecticides on bees, but we also wanted to look at ways that you can reduce the risk. There is a new chemical class, anthranilic diamides, which have a different mode of action. So they target muscle groups of specific types of insects, so they are harmless to insects that are not targeted. And so they have very low toxicity to things like birds and people, and even what we're anticipating, bees. And so we did field trials in 2011, 2012. Jonathan Larson, now Dr. Jonathan Larson, this was his PhD work, looked at bluegrass with 30% white clover cover and applied two treatments, neonicotinoids and anthranilic diamides, and then had a control where he didn't apply anything. This was fun. He ordered boxes of bumblebee hives, and he got stung a lot, but it was worth it for science. So he set up these open bottom tents around the fields and ensured that each of them had around 30% clover cover. And then he ended up treating with neonicotinoid, anthranilic diamide, and then not treating, and that's the control. So what he saw was that colonies that were exposed to neonicotinoids ended up having reduced number of foragers. So they did not have as many bees that were foraging. And so the foragers are the ones that go out and they bring the food, they gather the nectar and pollen, and they take it to the nest to feed the larvae. So these are very important bees. But what he found was that anthranilic diamide had no difference than if you didn't spray at all on the foragers of the bees. So that was very exciting. Another thing that he found was that neonicotinoids resulted in loss of bees. Around 30% of bees in the treated neonicotinoid groups did not survive, whereas anthranilic diamide, there was no difference than the untreated tents. So what are ways to reduce the impacts? We know now that anthranilic diamides are good. They will not negatively affect your bees. But if you had to, if you wanted to spray your neonicotinoids and you didn't have many other choices, what can you do to prevent that decline in bees? So we wanted to see if you mow after treatment, if that would result in the same amount of toxicity, the same amount of decline in bees. So he sprayed the colonies, he left them in the tents for 2 weeks after he sprayed it, and then he mowed, and then he left them in there for 2 weeks to see what would happen. So he said he found that bees exposed to the neonicotinoids after mowing showed no short-term harmful effect. So it ended up being the same between the untreated, the anthranilic diamides, and the neonicotinoids, and there was an equal number of bees that survived through all three of those. So what he basically found was that if you treat with neonicotinoids and then you mow, there was very little residue left in the following clover crop, that there wasn't a significant difference between how much it affected the bees. So that's one way to prevent major negative effects to bees. So basically, so now continuing on that, but he did find that the bees that were exposed to neonicotinoids ended up growing at a slower rate than the bees that were treated with anthranilic diamides and not treated at all. And although there were no differences in the types of bees that were produced, the numbers of workers, the numbers of foragers, what he did find was that colonies treated with neonicotinoids did not produce any queens. So queens are the ones that are going to overwinter, and they're going to be the ones that'll make the new colony the following year. And if you do not produce any queen, that bee colony is doomed. So that was very important. So that was not known before, and so he definitely, that's definitely very important to keep in mind. And so another kind of overall, neonicotinoid treatments in these weedy turfs can definitely we found significant differences in certain aspects, like the percent of bees that survived after neonicotinoid treatments, the percent of bees that were able to forage, and the fact that no queens were produced. So all of these are negative effects that neonicotinoids brought about. But there is the good news that acelepryn, which is the anthranilic diamide, did not have these negative effects in the magnitude that neonicotinoids did, and there wasn't a difference between the non-treated tents and the ones that were treated with anthranilic diamides. So that's good. If you want to read more about the specific study, this is Dr. Larson's paper, and you can definitely, if you want it, you can get my information later and I can send it to you. And so basically our summary is that flowering lawn weeds actually support a lot of pollinators. That's another research study that Jonathan did. He had a lot of bees that he collected off of clover, off of lawns, and off of alfalfa, off of lawns. And so this was very off of different weeds that flower in lawns. There were a lot of bees, and so they support many pollinators. But spraying neonicotinoids is a bee hazard because it results in a decline in the number of bees that survive. It results in the decline of a number of foragers that are available to go collect resources, and it results in the lack of queen production, which means that the colony is basically doomed. It will not be able to start a new colony the following year because there are no queens. But with caution and with using alternatives and even mowing, you can have a a big influence on the green industry as far as options for what to do about this. You can mow after you treat, or you can treat with different chemicals. And so that's definitely the moral of the story here. And if you want more information on the specifics of that, us or Dr. Potter can definitely talk to you later about that. Now that that project is done, this is another aside. I don't know how many of you guys have heard of the new bee labeling system by the EPA. Yeah, well, they've come up with this new labeling system that's going to put this diamond on any product that could pose risk to bees and other insect pollinators. So these labels are definitely going to be showing up now, and they're going to be on anything that has shown to be negatively affecting bees. So that'll definitely apply. All right, so the next part that our lab works on is the habitat loss part. And since the habitat loss is a major problem and it's accelerating as we're developing, we're trying to look at solutions of how we can make that work as far as try and build more habitat for bees. One of the projects that we worked on was Operation Pollinator for golf courses, and that's Emily Dobbs. She got her master's. Some of you have probably seen her talk. She used out-of-play roughs in golf courses and came up with an alternative to plant a wildflower mix in those out-of-play areas so that it acts as a habitat for pollinators. And these areas are out of play anyway, so it would be a win-win situation for a golf course. You can put up a sign, you can show people that you are being part of the solution as far as providing some habitat for pollinators, because that's definitely a major issue. So it'll have other environmental benefits other than just conserving bees. Monarchs are definitely in trouble, just like bees are, and so planting things like milkweed that monarchs are interested in would be a great part of this as well. And then insects that are attracted to these areas will stay in there. It'll be a refuge for insects, which means that there'll be a little habitat and food source for birds as well. So what we basically did with that was she evaluated different types of wildflower mixes. She wanted to see which ones would be the lowest maintenance, which ones would be the easiest to plant, and which ones would recruit the greatest number of bees and would be the best as far as being a great habitat and food source for bees. So the three types of mixes were the diverse bee, simple bee, butterfly, and control, and that just basically means that there were three different types of mixes targeted for certain organisms, and then one just weedy, out of play area that she did not put any flowers in. And she collected, so she planted this is what it looked like in September, and then in May you could start to see it looked weedy, it didn't look that great, but this is what it looked like in June. It started to look beautiful, flowers started to pop up, and then in August it was this beautiful paradise for pollinators, and we were very excited about how it started to look. And then the following year, June and July, again, you start to see different flowers come up at different times of the year, which is important because bees need to eat throughout the season. Bees need food resources throughout the season. And planting the same wildflower all over means that they'll only have food for a certain part of the season, and then there'll be nothing. So she wanted to overlap and make sure that there was something blooming throughout the pollinator season in her plot. So that's why she chose some of these plants. And then she collected bees by putting bowls of soapy water inside the plots, but she also collected using a net and collecting into a container. And then she identified all these bees, and then she found out which type of treatments were better and which types of treatments did not, which types of flowers were better at attracting bees to come up with the ideal wildflower mix. So what she found was that she collected 49 different species of bees overall in her plot. So that was very impressive. There were 49 different species of bees that were visiting, and only one of those were honeybees. And some of the very attractive plants that she found were wild sunflower, bergamot, lance-leaf coreopsis, black-eyed Susan. These you probably see all around. They're great for bees. Bees are very attracted to them. Plains coreopsis, New England aster, prairie coneflower, and lavender hyssop. So her complete list, if you want, I can definitely get that to you. But nurseries provide these lists to their to people who are interested. Some companies sell this research to, or provide this research to different people so that people who want to have a native wildflower garden on their property can get access to the appropriate types of plants that will attract the most bees.
So what my project specifically is going to look on is what homeowners can do specifically to sort of reduce the impacts of the pesticides that they may be using on some of the common ornamental plants that may be having an adverse effect on native bee populations. There we go. So again, we're also looking at that habitat loss because a lot of them use these ornamental plants as sort of an extra source for food, but also they may shelter in them. So they really do provide a lot to the bees that are trying to survive in these urban and suburban landscapes. So again, we're going to be surveying, the first part of my project is going to consist of a survey of the bees that we find on these common ornamental shrubs, these common ornamental plants. And what we're going to do, we're going to take several sites of each individual species that we're looking at so we can get a good distribution, a good feel for what different types of bees are coming to these plants, because some plants might be more attractive to, say, carpenter bees. Some of these shrubs might be more attractive to bumblebees. Some of them might attract a lot of honeybees. We really want to find out what types of bees are coming to these plants, because that in turn also affects a lot of the pesticide use and recommendations that we're trying to figure out, you know, what's going to be the best way to apply these. So a lot of these ornamental plants, we're selecting them based on how common they are, and also we want the plants that are going to be commonly treated with these pesticides, ones that have big problems, big pests associated with them, so that we're not, so that we're doing the most good. Essentially, we're looking on something that would have the most impact on the bees in our urban and suburban landscapes. So some of the plants we're looking at are foster holly, the knockout rose, hawthorn, specifically winter king hawthorn, spirea, azaleas, and these are just a couple of photos of us collecting. We're collecting both with the nets and into jars, and we're consolidating these collections, identifying them out to species, just again to get a feel for what types of bees are coming to each type of plant, if there are any significant differences. And another part that we're going to incorporate into this project is looking to see if there are any floral characteristics, you know, size and color, depth of the flower, that maybe can predict what types of bees are coming to these plants. That way we might have a more broad recommendation for the application of certain pesticides. We've already got quite a collection started. Abby was helping over the summer collect a lot of the bees when I was not here, and we've already got quite a collection going. This is just an example. And again, we're seeing a pretty good variety of bees. You know, a lot of your standard bumblebees and carpenter bees and sweat bees, but we are seeing the full gamut as far as the variety of bee species, even though we are talking about ornamentals in a very urban, suburban environment. And this is just a little information, the Pollinator Partnership website. This provides a lot of information to the general public about what types of plants to plant, which ones are good for bees or which ones are not. But one of the things we're concerned with is that there's not really a lot of research to back this up. And so again, another part of this bee sampling is we're going to be looking at how many bees are coming to these particular plants within a certain time frame, just so that we can get a rating system, so we can say, you know, this plant is very, very attractive to bees. We saw, you know, a couple hundred in a minute or two, or, you know, just something so we can put some data behind that to back up the recommendations for these bee attractive plants. And some of the ones that we found, and this is just anecdotal stuff we've noticed just by when we go to collect, we've noticed, oh, hey, that has a lot of bees on it, you know, versus, oh, well, it's covered in bees, it's like that swarming in bees. So some of the things we found to be very attractive are the butterfly bush, the clethra, crepe myrtle, foster holly, the fuzzy deutzia, rain tree, several others. And we did find some that weren't very attractive at all, both the azaleas and the knockout rose. We really didn't see much at all on those plants. And again, over the next growing season, we are going to be collecting a lot more bees, so hopefully we'll have a lot more data to back up our plant research. And the second part of my project is looking at the timing specifically of the application of pesticides on these ornamental plants. Now, we know that some of this residue is making it into the pollen and the nectar, but we're not sure exactly how much, and we're not exactly sure how the timing will affect the amount of residue in these ornamental shrubs. So what we're going to do, we've devised 3 different timings for the application of the pesticides, and we're looking specifically at neonicotinoid pesticides. So we're going to be doing a soil drench, one in the fall, one in the spring before bloom, and then one after the flower drop in the summer, and seeing if there's any significant differences in the amount of the pesticide residue making it into the pollen and the nectar. The plants that we're specifically doing this with are the Foster's holly, the clethra, and the winter king hawthorn. And again, as I said before, we're doing a fall application, we're doing a spring application before bloom, and then one after the flowers drop. So stay tuned. This project will be over the next approximately 2.5 years. So hopefully we'll have a lot of data and we'll be able to draw some nice conclusions and come up with sort of best practices with the timing, at least of the applications of these neonics on ornamental plants, at least in the suburban landscape. Just a couple of our acknowledgements. Any questions?
I have a question for Abby about Dr. Larson's
Yes.
research. Okay. If you weren't listening carefully, you could walk away from this thinking that bees exposed to treated clover, you know, are in great peril. But they were restricted to feeding for 2 weeks, so they could only feed on treated flowers, correct? Are there any plans to, since we know that bees, you know, are wide-ranging in their feeding and can dilute the intake of an insecticide by foraging on untreated plants, are there any plans to maybe look at, do the same study, but where only, you know, 10% of the plants within the enclosure were treated, or something like that? Because I understand the need to get a real-world look at this versus a lab world.
Yeah.
So is there anything in the works on that?
Actually, a part that we didn't include in this presentation because we were worried about time was that Dr. Larson also looked at whether these bees would discern treated versus untreated. So he had bees that were spread out over a plot that was divided, and half of it was treated and half of it was not treated, and bees were not discriminating, so they would not be able to detect what's treated and untreated. So that's a part of it. And also the way that neonicotinoids act, because they are systemic, the way that they affect bees is that they affect the nervous system and it causes paralysis. So the diluting, as much because nectar is their food source, the diluting wouldn't be able to help them very much, but then again, there was only still a 30% reduction. So there are ways that some bees are still surviving. So we can't just say that bees are going to immediately drop dead. So that's definitely, but what was troubling was that bees could not tell plants that were treated and untreated. They would not
Correct, so
discriminate.
they can't select, but if
Yeah.
there are refuges of
Yeah.
plants available, not
That
everybody
would, yeah,
treats-
that
not
would.
everybody treats their lawn on the same day.
Yeah,
once
exactly.
they mowed, so
Yeah.
that there is a reduction.
Yeah, so then there would be a
ongoing
reduction,
reductions
and yeah, we did
exposure.
confine the bees and that was unrealistic. So
Yeah.
yes, that's definitely a possibility. Yeah.
On the alternatives to the neonicotinoids, for alternatives to merit, are they systemic as well, or are they long lasting?
No, they are not long-lasting, and they are not systemic, which means that they are targeted. So the way neonicotinoids are also not very long-lasting compared to some pesticides, but they are they last longer than these anthranilic diamides. But as far as the specific amount of time, that would depend on what you're treating for, I think. And so we can definitely provide more information, but I can't come up with how long they'd last as specific to treating for grubs.
Aren't there,
season-long control on this.
Oh, yeah? Okay, yeah.
aren't there other differences in neonics in their effect on bees?
Yeah,
Of
certainly.
different chemicals?
Yeah, so it is a chemical class that does affect the nervous system, but different types of products will have different effects on bees. So we were looking at the ones that were specifically used to treat lawns, and so this is the effect on that, but certain ones to treat different things would definitely have a different effect on bees.
Is imidacloprid the big one, the one they use for grubs? Is that?
Yeah, so that's one of the most common ones.
This video has been part of the University of Kentucky Nursery Crops web series. For more information on the topics discussed, please contact your county extension office.